Many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, check the link in the description. But now, enjoy the video. Yes, I'm really making a video about censorship in Gran Turismo. No, I haven't completely run out of ideas, yet, because for as unlikely as it may seem, the topic of censorship in these games is actually quite an interesting one. Given that the series has been going on for close to 3 decades, there are many examples of it that we can find across the various games. Whether it be to obscure inappropriate brand names found on certain cars and tracks, or the usage of offensive words and imagery in songs and even players' own creations, today we're going to dig through the series backlog to find the most interesting cases. And not only that, but also the times when the series failed to cover up things they probably should have, something which has happened more often than you might realise. But first, what exactly is censorship? In simple terms, it's the act of suppressing ideas or information that are deemed to be inappropriate within a given setting or situation. These limitations are typically overseen by a higher authority based on what is considered morally or legally correct, and the same is true within the realm of video games. There exist specific organisations that rate games based on their content and how appropriate they are to audiences, such as the ESRB in North America, PEGI in Europe, or CERO in Japan. Ideally, a game should aim for the lowest rating they can reasonably achieve, as that will open them up to the widest audience possible, although a higher rating obviously doesn't prevent a game from being successful. As they focus purely on cars and driving, the Gran Turismo games, and circuit racing games generally, are some of the least controversial titles around. There is very little to find objectionable about the core gameplay, and so almost all of the games are rated E for everyone or PEGI 3. The lowest age ratings possible, but that doesn't mean that they can't contain other things that need sanitizing. Licensed songs are arguably the most obvious examples, as they're created irrespective of the game, meaning that they can very easily contain explicit lyrics and themes. Of course, the simplest solution would be to not use songs like these, but through removing or obscuring only the offensive parts, they can still retain a low age rating. This is something that we've seen many times in Gran Turismo. Here's a random example from Gran Turismo 4, Don't Mean a Thing by Borialis. Now listen to the original. As I say, this is just one of countless examples. The NTSCU version of Gran Turismo 3 features a song by Snoop Dogg, Dogg's Turismo 3. What's funny about this case is that despite the fact that the song was created specifically for use in the game, it too features explicit lyrics which had to be removed.
Doggy, D-O-double-G in the Gran Turismo 3.
But even if a song contains no rude lyrics at all, it can still require intervention. If you're well versed in Gran Turismo memes, or have simply just played the PAL version of Gran Turismo 2, you've most likely heard this song before. Not gonna lie, I think it slaps, but that's besides the point. This is a remix of a Fatboy Slim track that goes by the name of... yeah. By the way, I'm gonna try and avoid saying these words myself, as without that there will already be a fair amount of expletives in this video, and I'd rather not push my luck with the dreaded yellow dollar symbol. Anyway, in-game, this song is instead credited as Illing in Heaven. Illing is a slang term used to describe someone who's acting foolish or crazy, so it's not exactly a light-for-light replacement. If they had used the original version of the song instead, well, let's just say that I'm not surprised that they didn't.
Fatboy Slim is fucking in heaven. Fatboy Slim is fucking in heaven. Fatboy Slim is fucking in heaven. Fucking in heaven.
We've seen expletives in the lyrics and also the name of the song, so why don't we complete the set? The soundtrack of Gran Turismo 5 contains songs from 2 separate artists that have an F-bomb in their names, both of which are covered up with asterisks in-game. In case you're wondering, neither of the songs themselves include any rude lyrics. Honestly, it is probably just a coincidence, but part of me wants to believe that this was done on purpose. Now let's move away from the music and onto the cars. Of course, there's nothing particularly obscene about the cars themselves, but sometimes they may be plastered with logos that aren't deemed entirely suitable. In real life, racing teams are sponsored by various brands, some of whom make products which aren't appropriate for all ages. Alcohol is easily the most common example, with brands like Martini having their name covered up on cars which their logos adorned in real life. However, this does create an interesting double standard where alcohol advertising is okay when it comes to real-life racing that can be watched by anyone, and yet it somehow becomes a problem when these same cars appear in racing games. Try to work that one out. Tobacco sponsorship is another case, with cars that feature brand names like Marlboro and Rothmans also having these logos removed or obscured in-game. In this example, it is worth noting that tobacco sponsorship has been banned in motorsport since the mid-2000s, and many countries had laws against it well before that. But even companies who don't appear to supply products or services that could be seen as inappropriate can also end up having their logos removed. In these cases, the reason usually boils down to legal complications. The Mercedes CLK touring car first appeared in Gran Turismo 3 as the championship winner of the 2000 DTM season. But if we fast forward to the car's final appearance in the series so far in Gran Turismo 6, you'll notice that it looks a bit different. Some of the logos were replaced with barcode-style blocks, specifically the Arcor windshield banner and the Mannesmann text that could be seen in various places. Although the reason for their removal has never been officially explained, from my research it seems to relate to Vodafone's controversial takeover of industrial conglomerate Mannesmann in the 2000s, which also included the D2 and Arcor telecommunications brands. D2 was the car's title sponsor, and it is the only relevant branding that remained on the CLK in the games after GT4. It is worth noting that the Opel Astra touring car, which also raced in the 2000 DTM season, did retain its Arcor windshield banner, as well as D2 Mannesmann logos on its number boxes. However, in this case they only appeared on the car because they were sponsors of the DTM itself, hence why every car that raced in the series featured these same logos. This is far from the only example of brand logos like these being removed, but it is one of the only ones that I can find with some amount of inferred reason. Most of the time, these things occur behind closed doors, with the assumption being that Gran Turismo simply couldn't get or retain the license to use that specific brand. But when it comes to things being obscured, not because they're necessarily inappropriate, but instead because the game simply couldn't get permission to use them, the rabbit hole runs deeper. The Formula cars from Gran Turismo 3 are some of the best examples of this. In the NTSC versions of the game, the 6 cars included are all directly based on real F1 cars that raced throughout the 80s and 90s, but with all of their notable branding removed. The same thing would befall the Lotus 97T, which only appeared officially in GT6 before being reskinned as the generic F1500 TA in the games after. Hell, even the Circuit Côte d'Azur, which appeared from GT3 through to GT6, is just an unbranded version of the real-life Monte Carlo street circuit, possibly thanks to an exclusivity deal between the track and Formula 1, but that's just speculation. If you want to know more about the complicated relationship between F1 and Gran Turismo, I recently made a video covering exactly that. And if you're interested in cases where cars and tracks weren't simply rebranded, but instead removed from these games entirely, I have a couple of videos diving into those as well. You'll find all of the links in the description. So, those are the various ways in which censorship has affected the Gran Turismo games. But one angle that I haven't covered yet is user-created content. Naturally, any game that allows players to upload their own content, whether that be in-game pictures, livery designs, or even just text, is subject to internal review. As you would expect, many rude and offensive words are blocked outright, but GT has also been known to censor some pretty bizarre things. This can be caused by words that contain another phrase within them that isn't deemed appropriate, or for having a more unsavory second meaning. But for some of these examples, I really have no clue. However, probably the highest profile form of player censorship is when it comes to custom liveries. Most of the time, it's easy to understand why certain designs get removed, as Gran Turismo is supposed to be appropriate for all ages. But there have been tales of people having their designs deleted for no obvious reason. A few years ago, a whole slew of liveries and decals depicting the logo of tool company DeWalt were completely erased from GT7, with some players being suspended from PSN, and a few even having their accounts terminated. The reason for this was never addressed directly, with these players instead being given a generic breach of conduct message, only adding to the confusion. From what we can tell, upon learning about their logos being uploaded into the game, DeWalt most likely threatened legal action against Sony, resulting in them taking down anything with their branding. A quick search for liveries in GT7 using the tag DeWalt shows that this still seems to be the case. Fortunately, DeWalt appears to be an outlier in this respect, as we've yet to see similar action from any other major brand. Whilst explicit decals and liveries are obviously a no-go, the same doesn't apply to brand logos that can't appear in the game officially, such as alcohol and tobacco sponsors. As far as I can tell, there is absolutely no rule against these, meaning that Gran Turismo and other racing games with livery editors represent some of the only places where advertising cigarettes is technically still possible, albeit not in an official capacity. Once again, this double standard has always been very bizarre to me, but given just how many classic and iconic racing liveries have featured brands like these over the years, it's just become accepted, and that's kinda cool. All in all, the realm of user-generated content is a strange one. Whilst there are some general guidelines for what is considered suitable and not suitable, in my opinion, there are still far too many grey areas. Of course, if you're really unsure, or just want to have some silly fun, you can choose to not upload your liveries and keep them to yourself. But all of this discussion leads me onto the topic of censorship fails and controversies. No matter how thoroughly these games are scoured for traces of anything deemed inappropriate or incorrect, there will always be some that manage to slip through the cracks. And sometimes they've even been done deliberately. Gran Turismo as a series is famed for its accuracy, not just in the driving and physics, but also when it comes to the cars as well as the tracks. This latter point has led them to do some interesting things, such as including advertisements for car manufacturers that legally couldn't be in the game, and even competing racing sims, all in the name of accuracy. Honestly, it's kinda cool to see this attention to detail, but this approach has led them into some awkward situations. On two separate occasions, Gran Turismo has found itself embroiled in a legal battle relating to the depiction of a circuit located in Italy. In the run-up to the release of Gran Turismo 5, a new karting track was shown off based in the town of Siena, Piazza del Campo. The only problem? Whilst GT had gotten permission for Siena and its main square to appear in the game, they apparently didn't get permission to use the local flags representing each district of the town, known as Contrade. These Contrade each have representatives in the Palio di Siena horse race that's held twice a year in the main square, which acted as inspiration for the track in Gran Turismo. But the local government of Siena wasn't happy about their flags appearing in-game, citing it as offensive to the town's cultural heritage. Somehow. They then threatened to have the game banned from sale in Italy unless a compromise was reached. Fortunately, the solution was rather simple. Just remove the offending flags. And about a week after the story first broke, this is exactly what was reported by the Italian press. So, problem solved, right? Well, whilst it seemed simple on the surface, it may not have been in reality. Because when the game released a few months later, the track was suspiciously absent. Piazza del Campo did still appear as a photo travel location, but that was it. So, is it possible that the story we know is merely just the tip of the iceberg? After all, if Siena viewed the usage of some flags as offensive to the town's cultural heritage, is it that hard to imagine that they might object to the idea of their main plaza being turned into a karting track? I think it's very much possible, but why nothing further was ever disclosed publicly is a total mystery. But if there were any positives to come from the situation, it's that GT5 actually received a noticeable bump in pre-orders from the town of Siena following this controversy. In 2019, it was discovered that data from a huge number of tracks, mostly from past GT games, were left unused in GT5's game files, and this included Piazza del Campo. Sadly, all that remains are the course logo, track map, and a couple of thumbnail images. The circuit itself has yet to resurface in any form. An Italian track that did fully appear for the first time in GT5 was Autodromo Nazionale Monza, aka just Monza. But in 2014, it too became the subject of a legal battle pertaining to its scenery. On the start-finish straight, you can find an overhead gantry with signage from Virag. Virag is an Italian flooring company that was founded back in the 1960s and has a long-running sponsorship deal with Monza, and specifically the Monza Rally, which started back in 2004. Its logo appeared at the track in Gran Turismo 5 in 2010, as well as Gran Turismo 6 in 2013. But in July the following year, the owner of the company, amateur rally driver Mirko Virag, filed a lawsuit against Sony's US division citing numerous infringements. His main gripes were that as the usage of his company's logos weren't authorized, consumers could be misled into thinking that Virag was somehow involved with the games, and that as they sold millions of copies, Sony were also using his mark for commercial gain. Why it took Virag 4 years to notice this and then take action is not known, but it's believed that he was finally prompted by GT6's Ayrton Senna tribute DLC that released just a few months before he started the legal process. It included a unique 1980s version of Monza, but still incorporated the Virag logo in the same place. Anyway, most of Virag's claims were quickly thrown out, but the final point regarding the commercial aspect caused proceedings to drag on. It wasn't until late 2017 that the case was finally settled in favour of Sony and Gran Turismo, as a US court deemed that the usage of Virag's logos were for artistic purposes rather than promotional ones. In spite of that, Virag logos have not reappeared in any of the games since. It's also worth noting that one of the key factors in why Sony was able to win this case was because the logo was part of the scenery, as opposed to appearing on a car or anywhere else in the game. This explains why some other examples we've looked at were dealt with by just removing the offending logos instead. Also, even if Sony could successfully defend their right to use a company's logo without their permission, engaging in a protracted legal case usually isn't worth it. Whilst some hope that this case could set an important precedent for racing games going forward, it's mostly just become a strange footnote in Gran Turismo history. The Siena Contrade and Virag logos at Monza are examples that were eventually noticed and flagged by the relevant parties. However, there have been a few other cases that, outside of hardcore Gran Turismo fans, have gone entirely under the radar. As discussed, tobacco sponsorship is completely out of the question when it comes to official content. Names and logos of these companies are usually obscured or even removed entirely, but that hasn't prevented them from cropping up a couple of times. Staying in the PS3 era, another new location in GT5 was the Madrid street circuit. This track featured pretty prominently in the marketing of the game, and GT5's launch party was even held in Madrid. But in-game, it has a bit of a secret. Partway around the track, you can find a couple of payphones with advertisements clearly featuring the name and logo of cigarette brand Marlboro. Needless to say, if these had been noticed at the time, they almost certainly would have been removed. But that begs the question, how did they even end up in the game in the first place? Well, I think it once again comes down to Polyphony's attention to detail. You see, the advert itself isn't specifically for Marlboro cigarettes, but instead a music festival they were promoting called Marlboro Mixtronica. I was able to find a slightly different version of this poster online where this can be seen a lot clearer. If I had to guess, when the Gran Turismo team went to Madrid to capture data for the track, this was a real advert which they photographed and then included in the game. Whoever was in charge of doing this either didn't realise it referenced a tobacco brand, or they did and just put it in the game anyway, thinking that nobody would notice. Funnily enough, in GT5, Monza also features a reference to Marlboro, as their chevron logo can be found in a few places, although their name isn't written. This would eventually be removed in the following game, but the posters at Madrid did reappear in GT6. Now, if you watched my previously mentioned video about Formula 1 in Gran Turismo, this next case will seem familiar. In Gran Turismo 2, the Laguna Seca circuit has a pretty unusual Easter egg wherein transport trucks for 3 then current F1 teams can be found just before the pit entry. These relate to the Sauber, Benetton, and Jordan teams respectively. Given that they appear in such low detail, you can't really make out any specifics beyond their colour and basic shapes. But with the series transition onto the PS2 and the higher fidelity this brought with it, these transporters were actually remade for Gran Turismo 3. Because of this, we can now make out far more, including the team's logos and sponsors. But whilst Sauber was sponsored by energy drinks brand Red Bull, like many other teams of this era, Benetton and Jordan were sponsored by cigarette companies. Mild 7 Benetton and Benson & Hedges Jordan can very clearly be made out here, yet again managing to sneak past the various ratings boards. Unlike the previous examples though, I believe that these were included intentionally. Formula 1 has never raced at Laguna Seca, so the real-life accuracy explanation is moot. It's possible that these teams may have tested here in period, but that seems too convenient and I couldn't find any evidence to suggest that to be the case. So I'm almost certain that they were thrown in simply as a fun Easter egg, most likely by one of the course designers. Still, it does make you wonder what might have happened had this been widely known about back when the game came out. Would GT3 have been pulled off store shelves and replaced with a patched version a la GT2? We can't say for certain. All we know for sure is that in spite of Laguna Seca reappearing in every mainline title since GT3, this Easter egg has not returned. The theme of Gran Turismo including things that they probably shouldn't due to their quest for total accuracy is quite a prominent one. And nowhere else is this more true than with the game's rendition of the Nürburgring Nordschleife. This track is of course well known for many things, but one of them is the graffiti that covers many sections of it. For the purpose of this video, I think one of the most interesting could be found at Brunchen. aka YouTube Corner. Here you can read a nice little message that's been left by somebody. I mean, I always thought my driving was pretty good, but I wouldn't go that far. I have to give a shout out to MattJ155 and his video 20 more of the best Gran Turismo Easter eggs, where I got this tidbit from. A completely uncensored F-bomb in a Gran Turismo game. Okay, maybe not entirely. The C and the K have faded away quite a bit, but you can still just about make them out. There's of course more inappropriate graffiti to be found. For example, I had a look at a small section of track just after the start-finish line and was able to find both this and this. But given that the circuit measures almost 13 miles long, and the fact that over the course of these games there have been 3 different versions of it, means that finding them all is no easy feat. So if you guys want some homework, load up the Nordschleife in one of these games and see what you can uncover. Who knows, maybe you'll even discover the rather infamous, artwork seen in this image. Alright, that E for Everyone / Peggy 3 rating is looking a little shoddy right now, but I have one final bombshell to drop on one of these games in particular. As previously covered, songs with inappropriate lyrics, titles, and even names of artists have appeared in these games, with their profanities either removed or replaced. But even still, there have been plenty of songs used that don't include swear words, but still have quite unusual themes for a game that's supposed to be acceptable for all ages. Personally, my first GT game was Gran Turismo 3. In fact, playing it represents some of my earliest memories. Living in Europe, I of course had the PAL version, which has a different soundtrack from the North American release. And what a soundtrack it is. I'm always going to be slightly biased here, but for me, this is the best GT soundtrack ever, mainly because all of the songs used aren't just good music, but crucially, good driving music. It's a small nuance that I feel a lot of racing games, especially more recent ones, kinda miss, but GT3 absolutely nails it. However, what I also can't deny is that in spite of the game's 3+ rating, this soundtrack skews much more towards an older audience. For example, there's a remix of a Muse song that literally opens by name-dropping a brand of whiskey. Yet again, weird double standard given what they had to do to some of the other content. Hell, even the song in the intro, Just a Day by Feeder, includes the line, "Feel my head explode from a night of gin." But for me, the song that always stood out, even when I first played it more than 2 decades ago, is Aisha by Death in Vegas.
And I think you ought to know, I'm a murderer. Baby's blood.
Seriously, if you haven't already, I recommend listening to this song in full because it is absolutely insane and I don't want to spoil it for you. But being so young when I first played GT3 meant that this was actually the first time I ever heard words like murderer and serial killer, from a Peggy 3 driving game of all things. Without trying to sound like some political commentator, there is no chance that they would get away with this today. It is, for my money, the most inappropriate song to ever feature in a Gran Turismo game, and it doesn't even include any profanity. It's still a great driving song as well. But that begs the question, over the course of this series, have there been any in-game songs that include blatant swear words? Well, sticking with GT3, all of the songs from the PAL soundtrack were carried over from the game's original Japanese release. However, one of them, Grand Theft Audio's Dead Man Leaving, originally featured a few expletives which had to be edited out. But for Japan they didn't bother and just left the song totally as is. So there you go, the answer to my previous question is a resounding yes. However, I have to admit that this isn't all that shocking. A lot of countries don't bother to censor foreign swear words in their media, mainly because most of their audience wouldn't understand it anyway. But when I talked about dropping a bombshell on one of these games, I wasn't talking about GT3. I've mentioned it before, but my most played GT game is Gran Turismo Sport. I have logged over 1600 hours in it, most of that time spent either racing in or practicing for online sport mode races. But something that I only realised later was that a lot of the top esports players who I competed against chose to turn the in-race music off. I never did this as I didn't feel like there was any real benefit. So what this means is that I've spent an extraordinary amount of time listening to this game's in-race soundtrack. And because of this, I noticed a few things that almost nobody else has. There's a song in this game called Beatdown from the Australian band Palms, and if we take a listen to it... GT Sport has only one universal version, meaning that these swear words are present no matter where in the world you play it. So, how did this even happen? Well, it seems to be that simply nobody noticed. Not the people who put the soundtrack together, not the ratings boards like the ESRB and PEGI, and not even most of the millions of people who played the final game. Whilst I'm not the only person to ever notice them, I can say that these explicit lyrics are not widely known about. Looking it up, I could only find a handful of times they were mentioned by anyone. If this had been picked up by the mainstream, they almost certainly would have been removed. But incredibly, Beatdown isn't the only example of this in GT Sport. A somehow even lesser known case can be found in one of the longest songs in the game, Return of the Pistolero by Juno Reactor. This track lasts more than 11 minutes, but at about 6.5 minutes through, some English vocals come in. This section only goes on for about a minute, but still manages to contain the F word 3 separate times. Honestly, it's kinda incredible that this managed to go completely under the radar for so long. I mean, it's not as if they didn't bother with any censorship of the music in this game. Just check out Back Back by Vince Staples or Disgeneration by A Tribe Called Quest for proof. To tell the truth, I had noticed the swear words in both of these tunes quite a while ago, but given just how obvious they are, and the fact that no one else mentioned them, I thought I was just hearing things. For example, there's another song in this game with a lyric that I always heard as... but it's actually just... It was only when I finally decided to look into this deeper that I realised the words I was hearing in these two songs are actually the official lyrics. Well, at least in the case of Palms. For the Juno Reactor track, the only lyrics I could find are for the female vocals in Spanish, which at least makes it easier to understand how the expletives were missed in the first place. So, whilst Gran Turismo has tried to maintain a squeaky clean image, now you know that beneath the surface, even they have secrets that they'd rather people didn't know about. Oh well, too late for that now. I have to say that this video was not an attempt to shame Gran Turismo and Sony for their carelessness. Stuff like this is bound to happen eventually, and it doesn't offend me at all. Personally, I just find these situations really interesting to talk about, and I'm glad that I was finally able to do so in this video. But it's impossible for one person to search every nook and cranny of these games for stuff that shouldn't be there, at least not without dedicating an unreasonable amount of time. So, if you know of any other types of censorship or censorship fails in these games that I haven't mentioned here, tell me all about them in the comments below. But for now, f*** you for watching, and have a sh*t one.